Hi, this is Brian McHenry of McHenry Software. This video is going to be just a presentation of some of the options and things you can do with the driver model path follower of msmac3D. Generally, in a lot of crashes you need to have a vehicle going around a corner or following a path and then gets into a collision. We've added a few enhancements to the path follower driver model to make it easy to set up the path, set up the driver model, and then to export that steer at whatever increment so that you can then import it and use it as a standalone. So then you don't get into the whole topic of, well, what is driver model and how do you know this represents a driver? It's just a question of if I need to make a corner at different speeds, instead of having to hit and miss on everyone, why not have the ability to run the vehicle around the curve? Let's just go back to this beginning. We're going to turn off. Now that's the tracking view, which is there's a project that is called the path follower template, and that's just a template that you can use for anything because you basically clone it and then you can bring in your own background or 3D whatever you have for your terrain and area, and then you bring in your two vehicles. You can swap them out. We're going to do that. We'll show you in a minute. And then you set a path, follow the path, and then you can create the inputs to have that be just standard steer instead of having to mention or use the path follower. But let's go ahead and set this. We turned off the tracking camera. And then let's just go ahead to our overhead. Now, one of the things you notice here is this car here follows a path and then gets hit. But let's go ahead, and one of the things that we do when you're first setting up impacts, I know a lot of people start at impact, and you can do that to get the speeds to find out what it takes. But then when you actually do a final reconstruction, you should find what was the angular and side slip of the vehicle in order to follow the particular path that it was following approximately. It gives you a better approximation of the results. So for this one, what we do is first thing you do is on your input cards, and anytime you look at this, or if you go back to the old grid, remember if you click on this grid here, you can go out to the grid for some of our users that have been around for a while. But here you have a grid, and we have the 402, 3, 4, and 5, which are the driver models. You see the description to the right. And we have those set up, but then you're going to go ahead and manually change those. But one other thing we do, ability to turn off the interaction of the vehicles. And if you notice on card 83, we're going to go to field 9. But once you're on that field, if you hit the F1 button, you see that it gives you a little more description of the things you can do. Notice that the no call 1, 2 is 83 field 9. It's set to turn off, and here are I will highlight them real quickly. You see it's set to turn off the collision interaction between vehicle 1, vehicle 2, and vehicle 3 if present. There are some options to have it for 2 and 3. We'll go into that at a different time, but for right now, we go ahead and close that. Let's just set that to 1. And now, given, without even talking about what inputs we use and how we came up with them, if we rerun the simulation, now we see when the vehicle comes, it makes its turn, but there's no collision being simulated. Now, how do we get this path? One of the things that's missing, we're not showing here right now, but there's an option. If you hit this settings option, there's a number of settings in here, and I recommend you familiarize yourself with it about the ground, general, lights, editor, and miscellaneous. And one of the things it has here is the ability to turn on or off the path, desired path. Now you notice there's a line there, a red line. Hopefully you can see that. That red line is the path that I specified by these inputs on the card 404, which means I went straight for 50 feet and then minus 55 foot radius from 50 to 125, and then went back to straight. So goes straight, then minus 50, and then goes back to straight. How did we come up with that? Well, let's go ahead and change those, and that'll let you know. Well, first you turn off the interaction because you want it to first get through there. Second item you do is you set this to 0 seconds. Let's take the car, and we're going to change its initial position just to show you how we did this. See, there's its initial position. Let's just say we put it here for its initial position. And you don't have to have the path follower at the same point as the initial position of the path of the vehicle, and the path follower the same, but we move that. So now we go into our inputs, and you notice it shows that it's 28.6, or let's just say 28 and 73. Now down on card 403, there's 4 descriptors, and when you click F1, it'll give you the description, but notice it's at 30, so we're going to make that 28. Then we're going to make this 73, and the heading 267. So we have the same heading, etc. Now, generally, I try to run maybe 20, 50 feet of straightaway if you're going to go into a curved path or something, because otherwise, initially, it'll have a big error, and then it has to fight to get to your position. So now let's say that we want to start a project. Let's go ahead and let's clone this and do that. So one of the things we're going to do is you go down here. Let's just say you open template. You went out in the projects, and we're going to have this installed with your installation now, or with the update once you install the update. We go out and we say clone, which is this third one down. So we first open Path Follower template, and we're going to call this Path Follower Sample 1. Now you notice it closed that, and there is no run there, so there's no simulation being run at this time. So the first thing we'd want to know is what is our scene in the background, and that's where you go up here and you can bring in your grounds, you can bring in a picture, or go to the Google Map. And we originally went to Google Map on this, and we'll show you that there's now a Google Maps or a DXF or a cloud file or a mesh. Then also you can manage the ground visibility. You notice that we had 2. Well, originally we brought this in with our Google Maps. And you see that this is what it was with Google Maps, but there was a car in the scene and there was some trucks here and all that. So I actually went out to Google and just used a different time to find a better one. And then I actually got rid of some of the cars. You just, with an editor, we use Snagit or any editor that you just go and grab a area local to what you want to get rid of. Like for this car, I would have grabbed something here and moved it over to cover it up. But so now we go ahead and we turn on. So I then brought in and scaled to make sure you had a scale in there somehow. I brought in and scaled that newer Google one, and you notice now it doesn't have any cars, etc. Now the next thing I did is I placed this car at a position. And, you know, generally when you first start, there may be an origin or something, but let's just say I want to start them about here. Now, if I go into the input file here, you notice it lists 28 and 83 and 267. So now on card 402, which is the inputs, and 403, we have the initial position of the path. And let's just start them at the same point. You don't have to, but 28, 84, and 267. Now then the next inputs are for the path, and we specify with this 4, you can have 8, we can make it more, but we don't think you need any more, so we haven't really changed that to make it as many as you want. But so for 50 feet, we have 0, which means straight line. Then we go to minus 55 in that, but let's say we didn't know that it's minus 55, and we could probably get something better. So let's start with minus 65, and we start at 50 feet. We stay minus 65, and let's stay for 100 feet. So that would be 150, and then we go back to straight ahead at 150. Now, I normally set the time to 0, because then when you run it, you see it just does a quick setup and does the path. But you notice the path now, and there's the path. Well, obviously, it's too large a radius, and it because we want to go to this, unless you want to go to that second lane. If he's coming around, depending on which lane he wants to go to, he could go to the second lane. But let's go ahead and let's make that a smaller radius. Instead of 65, let's make it minus 60. And the same distance, and let's just see how that does. See, we're getting closer. But now it looks like we basically want to even go smaller than that, so let's go to minus 55. And again, we're not changing, we're leaving that on for 100 foot along the path. Now you notice that looks like this path here is looking good, but we need to come out of it sooner, because then so the tangent goes off down the center of the lane. So instead of 150, let's make this 130, but then leave that 150 transition there so it goes to straight at 150. That's a pretty good path. We could mess around with it to get it perfect, but that's a pretty good path. Now the next item of interest, and again, if you hit F1 on these, like for card 405, hit F1, shows you that, what is the initial probe time sample, how much time between the samples, what is the length of probe. There's error corrections, but we're generally not going to use those. That's back, we actually did some driver model things for the Federal Highway, and we can have that. Generally, I just do that you make sure that you have a gain and a P gain and Q gain and the probe length that are appropriate for your speed. And one of our rules of thumbs that we use from the research we've done is whatever your speed in inches per second is, that inches, 75% of that should be what your probe length is, and then you can make it longer or shorter. So let's just say that right now that we're having them at 25, but let's go ahead and put them at 30 just to change this from the original. Let's just say you have a different situation. So now at 30, that's 528 inches per second. 75% of that, let's just make this about 400 inches. Now, one other option I want to mention is we do have now a new option in here, extension, that you can actually have the probe, it's a single wagon tongue, or you can have it have up to 3 points where it does at the length you do in 75% and 125%, which gives you a little better transition. But we're going to leave this at the original for right now. Now we put in for the probe, we put 1 over that, so 1 over 400 is about 0.0025. And 1/10 of that is what we use for the Q gain or the damping. Now we want to set this to a certain time. Let's set this for 4 seconds. And we let it rip. Now we watch as the vehicle goes through. Now at 30 miles an hour, see it has trouble following that path. So either a higher gain, but let's first to check, you can see here we go to our up here in the top, hold on one second. Up here in the top is charts. We'll look at charts and you see its steer goes to about 17 degrees. But then if we look at the accelerations, that's a pretty high acceleration. So it's very simple to drop that speed. So instead of 30, let's try 25. And we'll go ahead and rerun it. Again, we've turned off the collision interaction between the two vehicles. You see that it's following the path pretty good. Now let's go ahead and look at the steer. Here we go up to here. There's all these, you can select charts here. You can create a chart. Check out the chart instruction video. But let's go ahead and let's close that. The ones that I just happen to have up here, but you can put whichever ones you want for priority. If we look at steer angle, and we see that, again, this is that initial, the fact that we don't have the exact position between the two. And there's the steer. And just for of interest, to show you one thing, is let's go ahead and grab that. Now we're going to close, and let's put that option I mentioned about 3. It's field 8. Option to monitor 3 points. And let's just see how much it changes. It's now we're just going to run it again. Now with the 3 point, we see we follow a slightly different path. And again, we've turned off the collision. See how it's running a little to the inside? So now let's go ahead and let's look at a comparison. I looked at the steer angle. See here, there is the steer angle for the 3 point, and then I did the 1 point that I've already grabbed. And then here's a comparison of the two. You see that with 3 point, it's a little smoother transition, since when you only have a single point, then it kind of follows the path and can abruptly approach, etc. But it gives you a good comparison. So now getting back to the run, again, we're using the 3 point because that just seemed to have a little better path, but you could do the 2 point, etc. But you see now they're not hitting. But that's one of the beauties of not hitting, is that now we can say, is this how we want them to hit? And of course, you can zoom in. Let's go ahead and hit zoom. And now you would have evidence and damage of how the initial impact looks like. And then once you simulate the collision. SMAC has a unique presentation of where the general area and extent of damage that would occur. So now we're going to go ahead and turn on the collision. So what that is on card 83, we turn that off. We rerun. And let's go back to our initial view. You see we have a good collision. Now one other item to add is if you use a card type 2, meaning pre-impact, post-impact, the steer will stop at the point of impact. Because if we don't use that, let's just set that to 1 here. If we set that to 1, then as the car spins out post-collision, it's still in steer mode and wants to, see, it's still in steer mode and it wants to try to steer towards the path even though it's being rotated. Whereas having a type 2, which are 2 or above, because remember, if you have a table of 20, like for this, let's say there's 20 steer inputs for this path follower, you could have that set to 21 and be the last field on that it would then ramp to when impact is detected. But now when we run it with that, see how the steer now basically goes constant at the point of impact. And if we wanted to know what was the point of impact, you go to the output files, run summary. It says about 2.87 seconds. We get a 27 and 37 mile an hour delta V. So you see they hit. And of course we have tracking view, which you can create however you want, but this one we just happen to create a one that after they all are in view, we then start zooming and dropping so we can see the three-dimensional aspects of the collision. So now to quickly recap the items. First thing for a path follower is go ahead and clone. You open up, go to the directory and open up path follower template. Clone it with this item here, clone, create a new project. Next, go out to ground, bring in a new ground, and then any of these grounds, like for example that first ground that we're not showing, see we can show it but we don't really want it, but you can always get rid of it by just saying delete. And it's gone. Now then you can bring in whatever your intersection or whatever you have. Next, for the vehicles, because you've cloned it, you have two vehicles, we could change this vehicle. So for right now, let's just say we wanted to change it to a, and again there's options to change the graphics model and specs. Made it a little smaller, so now we click on here to change graphics model and specs. And we can go and pick a different model, whatever for your particular case. And we can put in a Pacifica. There's specs in there, but you can go based on what year, and then you can add in occupant, and now it does keep track of occupant cargo weight. Then we say OK. And you can then click on that vehicle, and you can change the color. Go to the color here. Instead of green, we can make it whatever color you want. We'll make a brown car. For that other vehicle, we can leave that. Let's just say it happened to be the same one. Now we basically rerun this. And it's going to try and follow that same path. Now, I mentioned another thing on the checklist, settings. Show that path follower. Turn it off when you're making videos of that, but you can turn it on and show it. Also, so you've changed your vehicles, you change your path. You iterate the path by setting the time to 0, and then you change here what are the radius you want. You can go up to 8 and insert another card and do it. For your probe length and your P gain, Q gain, the rule of thumbs, probe length, approximately 75% of the forward speed in inches per second, that inches, however many inches it goes per second, make it 75% of that. You can make it 50% if you want a little faster steer response, or that or longer if you want a little slower steer response. The P gain and Q gain also can affect that too. So then the next thing is having a pre-impact, post-impact, and it doesn't matter what steers you set, but just set that to a 2 so that you are using the path follower up until the point of impact, and then it turns it off. You also want, for every time you run this, we can go out to, and I'll use my text editor. There's a file in your directory, and we're path follower sample, that has the cards that you could manually go in and insert. We're going to probably have an automatic insert. It may be in there by the time this comes out, but I just wanted to post up this instructional video to get you started on the various components you can have. But you can then insert these cards in, so you can then delete the driver model. And I think that covers most of it. Appreciate you watching, and thank you very much.